Welcome to Day 2 DevOps, where the DevOps is in the details. I'm Ned Bellavance, and on this sponsored episode of Day 2 DevOps, we explore those details and how you can learn from the mistakes of others and build a solid DevOps practice on day one and beyond. With me on this journey of learning and doing is my co-host, Kyler Middleton. Hey, Kyler.
Hi, Ned, and hey, everyone at home. Today we talked to Ido from Firefly about the state of the world of infrastructure as code. We covered so many points, and I'll go through them rapid fire before the real podcast. Number one, Terraform remains king, despite what you might have heard on Reddit. Number two, enterprises have multiple infrastructure as code tools, and that's okay. Different tools have different strengths. Number three, eliminating drift is a great goal, but it's exceptionally hard in the real world, and it is a growing problem this year compared to last, and we'll talk about why during the podcast. And number four, and finally, more of your teams of varying infrastructure as code experience are deploying to the cloud, probably including your security team, maybe your financial team. That increases your management complexity overall and just makes it harder to keep track of your clouds. So good luck.
Yeah, Ido comes to this episode with some strong opinions, but he backs it up with real data based off of Firefly's State of Infrastructure as Code Report 2025. So please enjoy this episode with Ido Neeman, co-founder of Firefly AI and ClickOps curmudgeon. Welcome to the show, Ido. Before we dig into this State of the Infrastructure report, can you take a moment and tell us a little bit about Firefly and why you even chose to produce this report in the first place?
All right. Thanks for having me. First of all, my name is Ido. I'm the founder and CEO at Firefly, which is a cloud infrastructure automation platform. Basically, Firefly helps cloud teams, DevOps, SRE, platform engineering, DevSecOps, FinOps, and whatnot to manage their entire cloud as code. We allow you to tame cloud complexity and manage a consistent and efficient cloud platforms because everything is in code. If everything is in code, everything is properly managed, everything is consistent, easily governed, and resilient. The fact that got us into creating the State of IaC 3 years ago, so this is the third year we are releasing this report, is we believe in managing the entire cloud as code. It means obviously infrastructure as code, but also policy as code, disaster recovery as code, monitoring as code, etc., etc., etc. So we see ourselves as integral part of the infra as code community, or at least we hope we are. And we're very entrenched in it. And we spend our days and nights supporting hundreds of teams using it. So we wanted to share some data that we see as a vendor serving lots of teams with the community. So this is why we created it. Sometimes we get extremely interesting results and sometimes not. So it allows us to just take away the boring stuff and produce only hopefully interesting materials for the community to understand. Last thing I'll say here, one of the best things about State of the Infrastructure as Code is that it gives professionals a benchmark, right? I came from a meeting with a good customer of ours that told me, hey, I don't know why, but I'm experiencing more and more struggle around taming drift this year. And he felt bad. He felt like he and his team did something wrong that made this problem bigger. So I'm sending him the report, hey, see, it's not just you. And I can tell you about at least a dozen other customers of ours that experienced the same thing. So now they feel, okay, so it's not me. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Right? It's all of us cloud nerds. We create more complex stuff, so we incur more struggles. So to wrap things up, Firefly Cloud Infrastructure Automation platform, deeply entrenched into IaC, and this is why we created the State of the IaC, pun intended.
And I have so many questions related to that, but I first want to hear, what's your high-level takeaway? For folks to just listen to the first 5 minutes of this, what should they get out of this? What are the high-level interesting things you found?
All right. So first, the most interesting finding, I would say, let's take a step back. I think that we start by talking about cloud complexity and multi-cloud and multi-account, obviously on the rise. Everyone see it, right? I can just share that, for example, Oracle Cloud is a name we see more in the recent report than we saw in previous reports. So it's growing. Cloud complexity grows. Then IaC is de facto a standard. It's a fact. Everyone understands it. Everyone knows it. Everyone wants it, right? And I would say that almost everyone adopted it. Our report shows that 89% of organizations have already adopted IaC, which is great, right? Let's call it 90% adopted IaC. amazing. The rest will adopt it soon. But then when you examine it a little bit closely, you'll see that only 6% define themselves, and it's important to note this, define themselves as 100% codified. Because it's easy to get the decision, I want to be fully codified, right? Everyone that understands cloud understands why it's important. But then achieving full control, full IaC coverage over cloud is extremely, extremely hard. So we see more and more teams going after this goal, but goalpost moving further away. So I would say this is main finding number one, right? 90% adoption, but full coverage is still far away. Second one, I would say, and let's go straight into the more interesting stuff, IaC frameworks. Last year, or more than a year now, Terraform and OpenTofu forked, which is obviously very interesting topic for anyone in our community. And Crossplane is also on the rise and some other tools. And when you live inside Reddit, you might think that OpenTofu is everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone is very vocal about, HashiCorp changed the license and HashiCorp bumped prices, and now HashiCorp is part of IBM, and Reddit is all about, full open source, let's do it. And I love OpenTofu. It's great. I also love Terraform. I love everyone the same. I'm like Switzerland of the IaC. I'm not taking any sides. I love them all. So the hype around OpenTofu is massive. And we also see it growing in adoption in our day-to-day life as Firefly, but also in this community survey. But in reality, Terraform is still a monopoly. It's still the king of IaC. And not only it's the king, it's by far the most popular IaC framework. Even if you look about predictions, and we all know that if you plan to move from Terraform to IaC, you'll probably have some struggles along the way. But even if you take those very pink future plans, Terraform still remains the most dominant IaC framework. And people that are going off Terraform might experiencing with CloudFormation or Crossplane. And then they might find some other challenges. So it's keeping in Terraform. I will end this point by saying that the actual market share of Terraform is much bigger than it appears in our report. And why is it? Because if you are a startup and you have a decent infrastructure, but it's still manageable and you can move between IaC frameworks, is one thing, but you are one equal vote. If you are a director of engineering in a large enterprise and you can't really retrofit your huge infrastructure and you're quote unquote stuck, or you decided the change is not worth it to you, you still get one equal vote. So the data that we can't share, but we see very deeply in our customer base, is that enterprises are much leaning towards staying in Terraform, even though they might see some benefits in OpenTofu. And I see Ned had something to say. So
that is such a challenge to measure. I like that you pointed that out, that everybody gets one vote the way that you put together the survey. And so it's hard to take into account how much infrastructure each organization is managing with Terraform versus other tools. I would almost love to see a measure of resources under management by each framework and see how vast that is versus one vote per organization or one vote per survey taker. That's the sort of thing that you might have a little bit of visibility into as Firefly, but it might not be something that you can share publicly.
So I can't share per customer, obviously, right? But I can tell you across a data set of hundreds and hundreds of cloud teams, the change between, and it's only what we see at Firefly, right? We might be servicing a very limited scope of the market, but from our data, it's not just an order of magnitude, it's orders of magnitudes.
Wow.
So we do see large enterprises managing millions of cloud assets. We call them assets. If it's on your cloud, you build it, you manage it, you pay for it. It's an asset. It's not just a resource. So managing millions of cloud assets with Terraform, we haven't seen a customer managing even not, $250,000 of resources with OpenTofu or even close to it. Because more often than not, at least what we see, if you have like Terraform 1.4, you keep it 1.4. It has its own problems not being on latest, but you don't want to go and replace it with the newer Tofu because Tofu has its own migration path. So we do see OpenTofu on the rise, no doubt. Don't get me wrong. And I'm all for testing, experimenting, and using the latest technology. And OpenTofu is amazing. And I think the community around it is absolutely fantastic. And those guys are doing such an important service to everyone on the cloud. But again, enterprises and the very large cloud consumers are more risk averse. They like to take more time to see how things shape. And I think that over the past year, they saw that the pace of change of OpenTofu is not as fast as it's been in the first 2 quarters, when it was like boom, 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 new feature. Hey, state lock, wow, amazing. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why Terraform remains such a big monopoly over IaC.
Mhm.
And when you mention those folks that live on Reddit that care deeply about the license of their tools, that's me. Hey, everyone, that's me. I'm welcome to the club. For folks that don't live on Reddit, that branching off from the Terraform open source to Terraform BSL happened at 1.5.7. And that was my take too. For the enterprises that I have worked with personally, the ones that are conservative just don't upgrade their Terraform. Like, if it works, why would you ever change it? And that's, of course, how they get into these problems of running like, Cobalt in your modern day infrastructure. But as long as it works, why change it? And I know we have seen just super advanced, just high velocity from both Terraform and OpenTofu since OpenTofu dropped, right? Like, that competitiveness has for sure increased the pace of both development chains, which I love to see. But I know that a lot of enterprises like just haven't addressed this, like haven't addressed OpenTofu because they just don't upgrade. So they haven't had to, like Terraform works. We're on the old one from 10 years ago, but it still works. I don't know. I might exaggerate with 10 years. I don't remember when Terraform came about. Is that what you've seen, that like enterprises generally are more conservative and are using older versions of Terraform? So like maybe they're not even looking at Tofu yet.
Certainly, yes. I think there are many problems up to it, right? Because if I'm running an open source database, right, I would definitely do everything I can to make sure I'm running the latest version of this open source, even just for security reasons, right? Not even speaking about reliability. I don't want to be with outdated version and then get hacked and blame myself. So this is very important. I do agree that in infrastructure as code, it's much more fragmented, it's much more complex. We see sometimes dozens and dozens of different Terraform versions in a single team. And again, it's not, we live in a multi IaC world, and you see it very, very clearly in the State of IaC 2025, but also you also saw it in last year's report, State of IaC 2024, right? There are almost no organizations that can live with one IaC framework. Let me give you the plain vanilla use case, and kind of you tell me if I'm mistaken here. Let's say you did everything right. You took all the courses and certificates and you deployed to the cloud with Terraform. But then you took a GitOps certificate and you're now all into GitOps. But the GitOps tells you, hey, let's say I'm using Argo CD. So now I have Terraform for cloud, and then I have Helm to configure and manage my Kubernetes, and then I have Argo directory to manage my GitOps. So I have now at least 3 of them. Now maybe I have some, let's call it vendor specific, AWS's specific framework to Kubernetes controller. So it's another one. Maybe then if I'm running on AWS, I probably have, and we do see it more often than not, CloudFormation. Fantastic. Now comes in another team. Let's say the SecOps teams decided that they develop in Node.js and they know how to develop in Node.js, an amazing vulnerability management solution. So now they're using Terraform CDK in Node.js, which is not purely Terraform. Or maybe it's CDK on CloudFormation, or maybe it's Pulumi, right?
Mhm.
So we live in a world where multi-cloud and multi-IaC lives together, and the good or good and bad things, they're both compounding.
I think I've been looking over my shoulder at the exact experience I have in enterprise platform teams. And also, we're growing by acquisition, as almost every enterprise now does. And so you acquire their tools, and you have to support them. Or you have to look at that retrofit pro con. Is it worth rewriting all of their stuff? And I've called it bear hug before, or, hostile takeover into my Terraform, my way of infrastructure as code.
I'm actually going to riff off of what you were just talking about with the growth by acquisition, and you acquire these companies that may not have fully codified their infrastructure. And so I guess my pushback would be, is it worth the effort to codify existing infrastructure that is relatively stable? Because I know you said a really low figure, only 6% have actually codified everything. Is it worth the effort to bump that up to 100% coverage? Or do you think that there's a theoretical number that's okay, like you're 75% or 80% covered, and that other 20%, that's not as important. It's stable, it's not changing. I'm not going to take the effort to codify it.
Very good question. So let's start with the end. First, I'm considering myself a cloud person. I forgot my days on VMware ES6 on-prem, and I would always advocate for cloud. But I will say, if your cloud is consistent, you might not need the cloud. On-prem is way, way, way cheaper and simpler to run.
Good point. Yeah.
But you chose cloud because you want agility, because you want innovation, and you want the latest. So as I see it, true cloud users don't have stable infrastructure. The infrastructure changes. It might have like stable guardrails. Here, here's my auto scaling. Here's how I'm pushing things forward, but it is changing. I am in agile development. I am deploying to production many times a day. I am adopting SaaS model or whatnot. So this is the first thing. Second is, and let me go back into the report. I want to go through two data points that are relevant to your questions. One is the top 5 benefits realized from using IaC. And I'll go very quickly on that. So top 5 benefits realized from adopting IaC. One is consistency, ensuring environments don't drift and look the same across dev, stage, prod, and prod in US, prod in Japan, prod in Madrid. Very, very important, right? So yes, it's worth it, because if only 6% or even it's only 40% of your infrastructure is consistent, it's a bad window for lots of chaos and maybe downtime or service disruption or excessive cost or just inefficiencies for you and your team. Then it's reliability and stability, which goes hand in hand, velocity and speed of deployment. If everything is in code, everything is consistent, you can just deploy very quickly because you test or adopt it once and just deploy it everywhere, right? If no, you need to make sure it's okay. So now, how do I know what I have across all my accounts? Do I have like 15,000 open Chrome tabs and then I'm going between my Confluence and HashiCorp's documentation and AWS and Azure's documentation? No, if it's in code, it's simple. And in the era of AI, it become even more and more prevalent to use it because maybe I just want to use Windsurf or Cursor to deploy everything. So consistency, reliability, velocity, and speed of deployments. Then comes governance and security, right? If everything is in code, it's very simple to put governance and guardrails. If it's not in code, how do you do it? Do you need a cybersecurity mechanism to do cloud runtime, another one for AppSec for CI/CD, then for code security, then same for FinOps, then same for tagging management, then for reliability, then linters, right? So I can use 7 different tools or have my, I want to say, have my together, but I will be more polite and say, I know what I'm doing and acting like a cloud professional. So I'm having everything in code and just putting my guardrails and governance as code limitations. And the last one is immutability, which is very important, right? We can get in later about the importance of IaC in disaster recovery, but if everything is in IaC, everything is backed up. IaC was created to restore your infrastructure and deploy it quickly. So these are the benefits. Now, I think a very interesting point you both made is about acquisitions. We see it all the time. A large enterprise which loves Azure and has ARM as the de facto IaC buys a startup which runs on GCP with Terraform. Now you need to bring them into the mothership. Now the mothership has its own governance standards and policies. How do you go about it, right? So this is where multi-IaC comes into play. This is where if you have everything IaC, even if it's ARM and Terraform, if everything is in code, you can have one policy engine to rule them all.
One thing that I struggle with is the fact that even if you're fully codified, you tend to think of your code as the source of truth. But it's not really the source of truth because the actual source of truth are the assets as they are deployed today. That's your true source of truth. That's how things are actually being presented. So when you're looking at stuff like compliance and policy and guardrails and enforcement, you have to be able to check to make sure that reality matches what's in your code if you're relying on your code scanning to catch security issues and policy violations. And I don't know how to square that circle. Like, how do I absolutely make sure that my actual source of truth, the actual assets deployed, match up with what's in my code if that's what I'm relying on?
Great point. So I will say this, not to try and talk too much about myself, but this is exactly what Firefly is all about, having a system of record for everything cloud.
Hmm.
and everything cloud asset, everything IaC, and how they are connected and being differentiated from each other. Because I do agree with you, having a full-on GitOps approach of my Git is the source of truth and nothing but it is correct is fantastic, but extremely hard in the real world, right? Think about it. You do have SREs changing things directly with kubectl or CLI or manually. You do
Hmm.
have scripts and third-party applications changing your cloud. If the Git is source of truth, it will reconcile over them. This is why, for example, we see lots of interest in crossplane, but when we ask the community about it, we see the adoption is actually limited, right? Because it's very hard to have full GitOps for everything, even outside of your Kubernetes.
Right. And that's because for folks who aren't familiar with Crossplane, it does a reconciliation loop on its own to constantly check the state of the world against what's in I forget what they're called. They're not called custom resource definitions, but whatever their version of that is inside of Crossplane.
Exactly. And while we're at it, so you're talking about how my actual cloud might look different than what my Git says or what my Terraform or Tofu or Pulumi says, right? And usually we just call it drift. And drift, as mentioned, is a growing problem. So on the one hand, we did saw in this State of IaC 2025, we did saw an increase of IaC coverage. More teams adopted IaC. Bigger parts of their cloud are now covered with IaC, which is great. And the deployment pipelines improved. Everything is better. So we expect, if these are the results, to see less drift. But we also saw an increase in drift. So how do those reconcile? How do you make them whole? So we understand that more and more teams are deploying to the cloud. You have the DevOps, the SRE, the platform engineering, the DevSecOps, the FinOps, the backend, the IT, and maybe some more, right? And not all IaC literate as the others. And maybe not all of them are using the same. We have few customers where, let's give you an actual example, the SecOps teams uses Pulumi, the platform team uses Terraform, and the backend team uses CloudFormation CDK, right? This is how drift is created because at some point, they're all touching the same resources, but they're all governed differently. So drift is on the rise, and I think drift is a very hot buzzword today in cloud engineering. Everyone understands it, maybe even because AI is extremely prevalent today. And in models, AI drift and data drift is a big topic. So also in infrastructure. So we do see more and more interest in drift, and even in the solutions side of the house, we do see more and more companies either building their own drift management solutions or looking for third-party solutions to manage drift for them. So it's another thing that you can see in the report.
I'm stuck on something you said earlier that seems like a total anti-pattern to me, which is that only 6% of companies, I think that's the right number, are 100% codified in infrastructure as code, as if that was a goal. And in my mind, it's kind of not. Like when you are not codified with infrastructure as code, you can be agile and have a high velocity, at least in your development environments. In production, of course, it should be controlled by code. Is the scope of this report just production, or is it all of our environments?
The scope is not limited. We hope it's for everything. And I very much disagree with what you said. So let me tell you something. Earlier this week, I participated in a panel around platform engineering and do good IaC and governance overcome internal developer platforms, which obviously they are. But then, on the waiting room between us and the previous speaker, and we are all cloud nerds, and we all speak about production incidents and DevOps tooling. So one person discussed how they had major downtime because everything worked not on their machine. Everything worked on staging, and they deployed it to production and they got massive downtime. And why is it? Because yes, production is fully codified. It's not fully, but production is governed by IaC, almost everything. But staging, as you said, is a little bit of a wild west because you want to be agile and think, and suddenly some things work in staging and not working in production. It's called staging because it's supposed to stage production. And then you say, okay, so I'll be IaC governed and codified in staging, right? But dev will remain Wild West. So it doesn't make any sense, right? You want your lower environments to be as close as possible to production. And you want your production, because many companies, especially large enterprises, they have multiple production environments, or they have different clouds running different applications. You must have all principles managed consistently. If you don't do IaC today, it's almost impossible. I don't say it's impossible, it's close to being impossible. 2 years from now, it will be impossible. When AI agents just run the cloud for us and we are just sipping coffee and collecting our paychecks, if they don't have a very ordered system of record and all guardrails codified for them, they will just rain hammock. So either our cloud won't be efficient, either it won't do what we do, or it just cost us $5 million per week. So we don't want any of this. The only way is to codify everything. And it starts with saying, hey, you know what? In dev, I want to be agile. Talk to your CFO. See if they're happy to get the bill for a dev environment, large dev environment running through the weekend.
I see what Kyler is saying, and I can kind of share my own experience with this, is that when new services first get introduced to one of the cloud platforms and I want to experiment with them, usually the easiest way to do that is by going through the portal or the console and just clicking around and deploying stuff and trying it out. And turning that into code can be a fair challenge, in part because sometimes the code tool you're using doesn't have those resources in its catalog yet. And also, the cloud platforms don't always create a convenient way to transfer what I did through my clicks into code. And I think, like, my pushback on the cloud vendors, and not even anybody in this conversation, is it should absolutely be a priority for them to emit whatever you're doing through clicks as code as easily as possible. So just click, I built this environment, now give it to me in Terraform or Pulumi or whatever my platform of choice is. And I think Microsoft has made some strides in that. I haven't seen the same level of effort from AWS and Google. I would really like to see it. So I can still experiment the way I want to, but then I can get the code afterwards when it's time to, give it to others and move it to more of a staging or a higher environment.
Yeah. An EC2 instance is something like 12 resources, right? When you launch it, because it's got the disk and the ENI and the IAM profile and like all that stuff that's just it's a macro. And I use that as a dirty word, like a little Excel macro that like it mostly works, but everyone hates it. It works, but it's hard to translate into code.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. But let me give you a spin. Okay, I agree with you. The easiest way to change and provision cloud assets or resources is using the consoles, right? And remember the early days of serverless. It was, hey, why do I need infrastructure as code? Just, hey, Lambda and Lambda layer. It's so easy. It's so great. But also, when I have an idea to a new capability or feature in my application, the best thing is just take this raw idea. Today it's with AI. Back then it's just raw code, which is not fully linted, and deploy it. But I treat it as a hot fix. And I know that once it gets some traction, I'm obliged to go back and architect it correctly and deploy it because I just created something that acts as tech debt. For the cloud infrastructure community, we don't see it as tech debt, and we say, hey, you know what? We'll solve it. It's kubectl. We stopped SSHing into Linux machines for a reason. We should stop ClickOps. ClickOps is bad. As a community, we should ban it. It should be a sign of disgrace. You're not a professional if you're using ClickOps, or if you do, okay, but it's a hot fix. You just created tech debt, solve it. And I agree with you. Azure did nice thing with Azurify. AWS, they are offering to create cloud formation for some of the stuff with all the limitations and it's not working correctly. And Azurify also has, but at least it's something. And there are some other tools out there that you can check, right? A Terraformer is one of them. Firefly is a managed service that can do it, but you can do it your own. But just remember to treat any ClickOps that you did as a tech debt. It's fine for the short term. If it lives up, maybe in 3 years, someone will just, hey, what is this environment? And then it's too late to change. No one knows, and no one will have the courage to delete it.
I've lived that so many times. My goodness.
The courage to delete it. I love that. That's like a tagline right there. Well, it's 2025, and we cannot get off of an episode without first asking you about AI and its impact on DevOps and infrastructure as code. And I think that was a topic that was brought up in the survey. So I guess, what did the report find about AI? And then what are your opinions on its impact in the coming years?
All right. So report shows that roughly 25% of respondents are actively using AI for cloud operations of any type. right? It can be to create cloud infrastructure. It can be to optimize cloud infrastructure. It can be to run some cloud policies. But when we look closer, you see that majority of respondents are still evaluating the AI for cloud ops or planning to adopt it over the next year. But almost half of respondents, 41%, are not using AI at all, at least not for production. And why is it? AI still has some hallucinations, and in production, it's very, very scary.
Mm-hmm.
So people are afraid. We do see people using more and more AI to create or edit their IaCs, but the agentic future of having an agent deploying things to the cloud, of getting a webhook or calling your PagerDuty alert and solving it is still far away from us. One of the reasons is guardrails. It's very important. Second one is AI is awesome, but AI doesn't really know your specific cloud. It knows how cloud looks like from GitHub and the public Stack Overflow, which is awesome. It's great. But do you let AI run your own cloud? And if you do, how do you do it? Which Azure, GCP, AWS, or Kubernetes service do you connect your AI agent to understand everything in your cloud?
Mm.
Right? It's still a complex thing. You still need to have a system of record with the relevant guardrails to feed these AI agents and LLMs to actually run your specific cloud. So as we try to process responses from State of IaC, we think that this what still inhibits it. It doesn't mean that by next year we won't see AI agents acting as layer one SREs. We might do, but if we're honest, they're not autonomous just yet.
My experience has been primarily on the writing side of things, using Copilot in VS Code or something like Cursor to help me write the IAC, but it doesn't always have the most up to date information about the cloud that I'm programming against and the services that are available. And so it tends to give me outdated versions of things or just get things subtly wrong or forget components that are actually required. So it's been a little bit of a bumpy road for me. I don't know, Kyler, you've been working with some of this AI stuff too. What's been your experience with AI and IAC?
I have. I feel that number, that's 25%, I think, was the number of folks that believe they use AI for infrastructure. I bet that is dramatically low because I think people misunderstand what AI is. Like you said, agentic stuff. I don't have agentic agents, running around and changing stuff, but I certainly have autocomplete in my IDE. And I bet almost every engineer, maybe this is just the bubble that I'm in, again, in my Reddit bubble, thinking that everyone's using AI all the time. But I think we're starting to get inured against what that word means, that AI. So like the autocomplete copilot I've been using for more than a year and I love it. And I don't even consider it AI now. It's just fancy autocomplete. But yeah, I have started to build agentic stuff and it is really powerful and really scary. And I certainly don't trust it to give it right permissions. I want it to gather data and summarize. AI is exceptionally good at summarization. But like you said, the state of the world for enterprises, we have 10 different tools and 50 different patterns in 100 different environments. And that's hard for a human. And it's certainly not something an AI can do yet. But ask me in a couple years and we'll see if I'm just herding my bots around building infrastructure.
Exactly. And I think one of the greatest promises for cloud ops and AI is MCP servers because now, when we create code for our cloud, we use a Cursor and Cursor talks to our Firefly MCP to see our cloud. So when we write our code, we ask Cursor to adopt it to this specific environment. So it helps us create the relevant infrastructure to it. So things are becoming much, much, much more advanced. And I think a buzzword that I believe died, but it was for a good 16 seconds. It was a buzzword. Was infrastructure from code. Do you remember this?
I do, yeah.
So, Carlo, good for you. You don't remember it, but it used to be like, say, hey, infrastructure as code is for boomers, and Terraform is as old as COBOL, and you shouldn't write infrastructure. You should just write code, and this code will compile to a YAML that spins up the infrastructure for you, right? And it's like the next gen CDK or Pulumi and all those. I think it's far from being successful yet. But this MCP server allows us to really get there because it allows us to get the most out of infrastructure as code, all the control, the accuracy, the ability to really control our platforms while not limiting us in creating the best applications. But it's application or infrastructure aware application development. You write your code, but when the AI does it for you, it's aware of where it's going to live.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's kind of where I'm seeing the growth in MCP. I have the Azure MCP installed in VS Code, and now it's able to interrogate my existing Azure infrastructure as I'm writing new code and use that as a reference point when it's building out the code. And I'm like, that's okay. I could see how this could, for a really large enterprise, become extremely useful because it can learn your patterns and your best practices based on what you've deployed. And you can also point it at repositories and other things to kind of scrape that information. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
I think the best part about MCP or AI generally, but MCP is a good implementation of it. It's not just the fact that it talks and brings the right code. It's the actual explainability. Because as I look at it,
Mm.
it's this genius engineer you have in your team where you can stand up from your desk for us working in office and walk 5 meters and ask, hey, what did we do in this and that 2 years ago? And they just know everything. Or yeah, how do I implement CloudFront distribution with 180,000 lines? And they know everything. This is this MCP now. You can ask it everything. What did we do there? How do this connect to our relay network? What's the policy for doing that and why? And it just gives you instant, accurate answers. I think this is the true power of it. Having the smartest team member at your fingertips.
It reminds me of the Brent character from the Phoenix Project, except he was only one guy, so he only had so much bandwidth to do things. But now it's like, no, everybody can have their own little Brent working in VS Code or whatever for them.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad we had you on the show. If folks want to know more about the report or Firefly, where would you recommend they go?
So you can find Firefly at firefly.ai. You can start free trial at app.firefly.ai. And you can also access the report at firefly.ai/state-of-IaC-2025.
All right. Well, we will include that link in the show notes so nobody has to scribble that down while you're driving or mowing the lawn. Are you a social person? Can people find you on LinkedIn or some other platform?
I'm a nerd and an engineer, so I'm by definition not a social person. But I do have a LinkedIn account or an X account. You can follow me, Ido Neeman, at both. Should be pretty similar, but also you can follow me. Most of the writings and idea sharing that I do is under the Firefly umbrella. So Firefly on LinkedIn, Firefly on Twitter, Firefly on Reddit.
Awesome. Well, Ido Neeman, thank you so much for being a guest today on Day 2 DevOps.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you to our guest for appearing on Day 2 DevOps and for sponsoring this show. And virtual high fives to you, dear listener, for tuning in. If you have suggestions for future shows, we'd love to hear them. Hit either of us up on LinkedIn, or you could send some feedback via the forum at packetpushers.net/follow-up. You can find me, Ned Bellavance, at nedinthecloud.com, and my amazing co-host, Kyler Middleton, blogging over on letsdodevops.com. And we're both entirely too active on LinkedIn. Stop by, say hello. Did you know that the Packet Pushers family of podcasts has been growing? There are several amazing new shows in the roster that you might enjoy. In particular, I want to call out N is for Networking. Hosts Ethan Banks and Holly Metzlitsky review fundamental concepts in networking like spanning tree, VLANs, and DNS. For those of us from the cloud world, it's a great primer on networking technology and a reminder that there's more to infrastructure than a friendly API and a Terraform provider. You can find N is for Networking and all the other amazing shows at packetpushers.net/podcasts. Until next time, just remember that doing DevOps is awesome, and so are you.